it looks like we may have lost Shriek permanently, but he just couldn't handle. Oh, I wonder where Ed's at. Oh, I have a question. Why is Dasein so he says Dasein is it's there? Why is it not it's here? Like, I think of myself, I'm here. I'm not over there. I'm here. So why? I mean, maybe so Chase or someone can probably like answer this in 5 words, but why is Dasein it's there instead of it's here?
So I think it's here, and it's here indicates a there.
Well, he says Dasein is it's there.
Here, let me find
He
the
says that
exact
a
line. Okay,
bunch of
so yeah,
times.
it's 132 in the German pages. So the being which is essentially constituted by being in the world is itself always it's there, according to the familiar meaning of the word. There points to here and over there. Wait, sorry, let me say that again. There points to here and over there. The here of an I here is always understood in terms of an over there at hand, in the sense of being toward it, blah blah blah, existential spatiality. Um,
So it seems like it's there is the primary thing.
Here and over there are possible only in a there. Okay, so what what I take all that to mean, to kind of simplify it, is really you were an I here, that makes sense, but that only makes sense within a there and a over there, or a yonder, which that's the old translation, which I think that's better for than over there. Okay, yeah. Yonder. That's just a cool word, I think. But yeah.
But he doesn't say that the here is possible because, or that he doesn't say that the there is possible because of here. He says it the other way around. Here and over there are possible only in a there. And I assume like when he like da sein is like their being, right? Or being there, their being.
Yeah.
And so I'm confused as to why the primary thing seems to be there, and then you here and here is with reference to there, not the other way around. And I don't really understand why.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know.
I feel like in an earlier chapter, and maybe there was some of this in this chapter, or I read last week's reading and this week's reading over the weekend, so I might confuse where some stuff is, but I feel like there was some association between the yonder and projects for Dasein to do, and I wonder if
Hmm.
the significance of the yonder slash the there has to do with Dasein being a directed being that is kind of chasing these projects.
Hmm.
Chiefly being a carpenter, of course, as that is the highest uh, form of being one can achieve.
Clearly,
It was good enough for Jesus. So yeah.
that's right.
But yeah, so the way that he talks about the yonder, the over there, is that I believe that's kind of the world of the ready to hand. So that's the interworldly entities that we would encounter in all those projects, and uh the way that we're involved in them and absorbed in them and are concerned with the world and our being. So I think that's why, for the same reason that Dasein necessarily is a being in the world, is also the same reason why a here would always point to at least a there and a yonder. That's the world. So I think, and the way that all those are sort of implicating each other and sort of locked into each other, I think that's what he's doing with also these kind of what he calls them like locative expressions here, there, over there, yonder, blah blah blah. Yeah.
That makes sense to me. Together with what James was saying that, um, like you said, their world is the world of these. I can never remember the ready to hand. I think is that I can never
Yeah.
remember his wish.
Yeah.
Um, but that makes sense because then that's kind of like the world of your project, like the highest calling being that of a carpenter, that their world is the world of the carpenter. So yeah, that I guess that makes sense. And like with reference to being a world, it's you're in a world, and so the world is kind of there, not here initially. So okay, you guys made sense of that for me. Thank you. What about clearing? The very next paragraph.
Yeah, hey, I wanted to jump. I want to, yes, I want to second this question. That was one of the things that I didn't get what he meant. In fact, there were a couple things that kind of branched off from that question mark that I wrote near the clearing thing. That all seemed at least somewhat contiguous, or at least like they. Yeah, okay. I have some questions about clearing, I have some questions about authenticity, and I have some questions about closure. But let's just for now, let's just do the clearing thing. Which Neva, you mean Heidegger 133, right?
Yeah, that was yeah, just mostly because it was right after where we had just been talking about, and that was something I was struggling with is clearing. So yeah, that's kind of the initial. Well, maybe I don't know. Anyway, yes, right there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I literally don't know what he means by clearing. Like clearing like a field, like maybe like like clearing like clearing away land clearing. I have a friend who works in land clearing, and he gets rid of trees and shrubbery, and that comes to mind, I guess. Um, but then I just want to talk. I mean, if we can get that down, I the last sentence of this paragraph. Maybe it's because I don't know what clearing means, but I then am confused when he says Dasein is its disclosedness, and this whole procession of disclosedness, or like how he talks about disclosedness later on through the chapter, that I'm also kind of iffy on because of this paragraph right here, and my kind of iffiness here on the clearing thing, I think.
Oh wait, the clearing. Yeah. So I think probably the one of the ways to try to understand it is so the word itself, Lichtung, that's related to the word Licht, light. So to see it as a kind of extension of, he's using this metaphor about light and visibility and the clearing. I think, oh yeah, so in the notes for the old translation, it refers to, yeah, this is what you would refer to when talking about a clearing in the woods. So if I'm in the woods, there's a bunch of trees in the way, damn trees, but also I look somewhere and all of a sudden there's a clearing in the woods. saying there's this visibility, light, disclosedness. So the point of what he's getting at, what is the clearing? It's Dasein's disclosedness of it's there. So it's this existential spatiality thing, but he's saying that that existential spatiality thing is itself also a kind of self-disclosure of its being, what it is, which means that's the whole reason why it's existential spatiality. It's what it is to exist spatially. So, yeah, that's probably the best way I can explain it for now, I guess.
Yeah, jumping off that, like when I read through this section, like this sentence in that paragraph where he says, at least in my translation, to say that it is, quote, illuminated means that it is cleared in itself as being in the world, not by another being, but in such a way that it is itself the clearing. So to me, when I read that, it seemed like he was trying to make a distinction between, when we use the metaphor of illuminated, it gives the sense of like there's something else illuminating it, as if it's like a platonic form or something like, the good or something is like making all things coherent in relation to it or something. But he's like trying to emphasize like there's not some external thing which is producing the intelligibility of the phenomenon. It's sort of the way it is networked within its coherence field or whatever is sort of self illuminating, for lack of a better word, or something. And so that's why he's trying to go for the clearing, because like the way Chase is saying, like when you're in that with that analogy, it's like it was never the light was never not in the forest. It was just being obfuscated by the thickness of the brush or whatever. I don't know if that maybe I'm mixing that, but I'll let someone else jump in.
It's interesting, the first sentence of that paragraph, he says, when we talk about it in an ontically figurative way about the lumen naturale in human beings, in a human being, or in human being, that lumen natural, the natural light, I don't know if this is intentional, but Descartes uses exactly that term to describe reason. Reason is the natural light by which you can see the truth. So I'm wondering if I mean, I don't, I'm wondering if he's reappropriating Descartes there, but not attributing it to reason.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what came to mind for me when reading this section is the concept of reason. And for me, of course, it was with Fichte, like the self-reverting um, acting of the pure I, which is the activity of reason. So yeah, I'm with you there. Excuse me. I'm with you there. There's like some similarity, but he's obviously attaching it to like this existential notion of space. And I don't know, to me it kind of just sounds like how reason is employed um in space, how we actually experience it in the like this embeddedness and um meaning, like how space is imbued in meaning rather than the objective interpretation of space of like coordinates and measurements. I don't know.
Although I'm guessing that he unlike Descartes and those guys would not attribute it to that. I'm guessing he would say it's like, I don't know if pre-rational is the right word, but it's something that it doesn't require the reflective rational. It doesn't require rational reflection, but it's something that is more, I don't know what, primordial, that's just what it is to be this being, is to make things show up as things, as beings.
Yeah, that lumen natural so that is Descartes, and I think it's probably one of the reasons why he's constantly referring to, Descartes, for various reasons, but I think he's saying that, okay, it is like that in the sense that there's a natural understanding that comes along with the mind, let's say, or what understands, that it has a natural way of understanding. But I definitely think he's uh definitely wants to distance his notion of what this is with clearing, disclosedness, whatnot. Um, he does not. It's definitely not reason. Although, of course, reason has many meanings, but especially in the way that, let's say, that the tradition would refer to reason, he wants to distance his idea from that and think of it more, yeah, and you think of it as a, if we're going to talk in terms of reason, it would be something that's pre-rational, I guess. And that's one of the biggest points that so he makes it somewhat in the sections we read, but in the later sections, he'll also really bring this point, that there's this understanding is a kind of pre-reflective, pre-rational way of understanding that just is what we are as part of, this being in the world. And then, but that is different from what do you, I think usually what's at least translated as knowing, kind of knowledge, this explicit knowledge versus an implicit understanding that we just are. Yeah, he's going to contrast those. So I think, I'm not sure exactly if he would probably consider something along, one of the problems is that this confusion has happened in the tradition of philosophy, that we've considered a lot this kind of, the natural light of the mind of understanding. We've seen it through this prism of rational understanding and explicit knowledge. And that's what I think he wants to reverse that and put back this pre-reflective, pre-rational, innate understanding that Dasein just is, was to put that back as the primordial phenomena. And then, yeah, explicit rational knowledge is something that is secondary. It comes later.
I'm I'm having a lot of difficulty um since a few sections ago just because I'm having trouble understanding how his notion is explicitly, and this is at the risk of rehashing things. But yeah, I don't understand how his notion of understanding is different from reason because to me, or yeah, maybe it's what you said because there's so many definitions for reason. But to me, the notion of reason isn't necessarily like an understanding. I think it's the way I'm thinking of reason is like this mode of operating where it's not necessarily extensive. Even it can be, I don't know, like the way I'm thinking of it is in a temporal sense, maybe, where as soon as I look at something, I'm already reasoning. Like it's impossible for me not to reason. And I'm not sh and so the way that I'm understanding Heidegger, this clearing and openness of understanding, it's kind of, I'm thinking that it's very similar. Like it's just this mode of operating uh, that is just pre-reflective and is instantaneous. I don't know if that makes sense.
So,
I'm sorry.
yeah, really quick, I would say it sounds like what you're talking about is closer to what Heidegger talks about as understanding, which is more read for the next time. But so understanding, though, it has to do, its temporality is future oriented. So it's that we understand ourselves in terms of our possibilities is the short version of it. But that we're already kind of doing that even as part of so the okay, what he gets at is, that we're in a mood, we're thrown into a mood. That itself is also kind of implicated in we're thrown, that's the past, really, is this thrownness. So we're disclosed as this thrownness, our past having been, but as projecting and understanding about the possibilities of our being. So that temporal nature is already kind of there, and that's all before we obviously we don't consciously think about that. That's simply how things are disclosed in order to even give us a field of existence in which then certain things can come in and then some object can come in and I can have some kind of explicit knowledge about it. But before that has to happen, there has to first be this understanding in terms of possibilities, in terms of uh, already my situated, disposed nature, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I mean, we'll get to that next reading, so I don't want to make too big of a point of it, but I do think what you're saying about reasoning sounds more like the fact that it's kind of some automatic thing that you don't consciously think about, but that you're using to simply evaluate everything just kind of immediately. That makes me think that it's closer to Heidegger's notion of understanding than at least the way that I was using rational, explicit, conscious thought as something opposed to that.
So I was thinking of it in terms of that ready to hand, president at hand distinction. So when I'm when I'm doing something, let's pretend I'm a woodworker. I'm not. My wife and son are, but I'm not. They have a whole wood shop that used to be a garage. Grumble, grumble. So let's imagine that I'm a woodworker and I'm using these tools, and I'm not thinking about them as tools. They're part of this world, and I'm using them, and I'm not thinking, oh, this is a saw that has these properties and that does this thing. I'm just using the saw to get something done. And so that's the way I was thinking of, sort of pre-rational in the sense of at least not reflective understanding, where when it's present at hand, you say, oh, this is this kind of thing and it has these properties and I can analyze it and study it. Whereas when I'm immersed in in this activity, these things still show up as beings of a kind, but they show up as these present at hand things that are just part of this environment that I'm working within, this world that I'm within. And so and I'm not sure about this, but the way I'm thinking of the clearing is Dasein's ability to make things show up, to make things appear in a sense as beings, as a kind of, as beings, so that, if they're, I don't know, like if the ferrets are running around in the wood shop, the things in the wood shop don't show up for them as these things that are usable in this work of making things. But for Dasein, they do show up that way. So I'm not consciously reflecting on them, but Dasein has this ability to make beings show up, to make beings appear, to make beings emerge in a certain kind of way. And again, in this present at hand, or in the ready to hand way, they still show up, but they don't show up in the sense of rational reflective analysis. Maybe reason's involved in there in some sense, but it's not the kind of reasoning. For example, when Descartes is reasoning, he's worried about essences and what is the essence of this kind of thing and what is the essence of that kind of thing, and whatever mode this is when I'm involved in the world, it's not that. Nevertheless, there are beings there that appear um, as elements of this world of work. Anyway, I don't know. You look skeptical, Chase. Am I kind of off the rails there?
No, I think that for the most part, yeah, that seems right to me. Um, I think another way to explain it, that we at least haven't so far gone into, is that this is why he's saying the primary way that this is done. So we're disclosed in this way, but we're disclosed through a mood, through being attuned to being in the world. That's what being in the world is being attuned. So that's the okay, I think we should get so this translation, okay. So Befindlichkeit in German it means something along the line. So I think it's a variation of you say something like wie befinden Sie sich, something like that, which means something along the lines of how do you find yourself? How are you doing? So he's doing something like that. It's translated in all these different ways. So the Macri and Robinson, they give the translation of state of mind. That's probably the worst translation in the entire book. It's terrible. So the Dune translation, standout is attunement. That works a lot better for me. But I found something that actually there's a list of the different translations for Befindlichkeit. So I'm going to read some of them. Okay. Findedness, so foundness, attunement, yeah, affectedness, disposition, disposedness, situatedness, where you're atness, and then state of mind. Kind of the one that stands out as awful. But yeah, I think that's the way it happens rather than through conscious rational thought, which I think that's right to associate that with more present at hand, where this way that we're kind of naturally we find ourselves in this disposition attuned to the world, and mostly in the way that we're attuned to the world is that world of the ready to hand. We're immersed in the task that we're engaged with in the world, and that's yeah, that's who we are as attuned. And then ontically, that's has to do with these particular whatever particular mood you're actually in. But ontologically, it's about attunement. Hopefully that doesn't confuse things even more, the whole ontological ontic distinction there. But yeah.
Well, and bouncing off that, maybe I don't know, maybe I'm on a tangential point, but it like I'm reading. I guess this is Heidegger 136. Maybe like two paragraphs in. He says, attunement discloses Dasein in its thrownness, initially and for the most part in the mode of an evasive turning away. And just that whole section there, one thing that was striking me as I was reading it is, I mean, and maybe this goes to show why, or like maybe the translation of attunement is better than state of mind, in that he seems to be indicating that the mood is, it's not just a psychological thing in me, as if I've got this private experience of my mood, that it's like always kind of already in the world and all this, such that, like, he seems to be making, I guess what I'm trying to say is, in that whole section, I wish I had the right quotes to draw, but it seems to me that he was kind of making the case that even, like in the case of boredom, he kind of talks about boredom at a certain point, and it's like, it seems that what he was saying there is, it's, if you were to pay too much attention to what it is that you're focusing on, you'd almost miss the boredom, because the boredom element is this kind of discomfort with what is, and this like seeking after, like this busyness, and like getting occupied with all these little things to fill the time. And so the boredom experience, so to speak, isn't contained in the content of what's in your mind, but it's the kind of the evasiveness of you trying to get out of your experience and busy yourself with little things. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to say, but maybe that'll speak to y'all. Y'all can, or correct me if I'm wrong on that too.
Yeah, the boredom thing, he talks in what is metaphysics, about kind of ordinary boredom, which is part of, so for the most part we are, or approximately, and for the most part, initially and for the most part, we are in a state of being fallen or entangled, absorbed into the world and the ready to hand entities, and are concerned with them, and blah blah blah. I know I keep saying blah 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 today, but I don't know. I always have like these weird idiosyncrasies of speech that I'll just repeat sometimes for like 2 weeks and then switch to other ones. I don't know. But yeah. So that's part of this fallenness, whatnot. And then there are these certain moods that are able to kind of go beyond that. And he points to profound boredom as one. Which goes in, I mean, in being in time, he'll talk about angst or anxiety, and that'll be another one, like profound boredom, that will show kind of Dasein's existential structure more so than the way that normal moods just kind of highlight. I mean, it's our normal experience he's kind of talking about, that they'll highlight certain things of our interest. But the whole fact is that they don't actually show kind of their conditions for possibility, for why they happen at all. So they'll make it where I am open to the world and certain entities, and so that I can encounter these entities, other Daseins, equipment, all good, but that doesn't actually show me the existential structure of what I am. So in order to do that, I need a very special kind of mood, anxiety, or profound boredom. But that's getting ahead once again. But yeah.
So I have a question, because we're talking about the location of these moods, and Matt was saying that in some sense the moods are external. It also feels like in some sense they're internal as well, because initially he starts talking about psychology and how that's like more of an ontological investigation. But I was looking, I think this is near where you were citing something, Matt, and he says here, this is in the Macquarian Robinson translation, factically, I also found this interesting just as a side note, because it feels like this is Heidegger weighing in as to how he thinks people should behave, which is rare, it seems like. Factically Dasein, this is on the Heidegger 136, by the way. Factically, Dasein can, should, and must, through knowledge and will, become master of its moods. And that possession to me implies that in some sense it's also internal. And so I guess I'm just wondering for people, I don't know, like where they think the location of those of these moods are, if it's somewhere between. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it kind of goes into what I wanted to ask about because on the Stambaugh interpretation on page 154 on the goodness, one, two, three, third paragraph down, he says, and this is the section, oh gosh, I always have to look at the title of the section to find reference. This is statement as a derivative mode of interpretation, where he says on 154, the possibility and impossibility of the analytical understanding of sunethis and diaresis, or relation, in the judgment in general is closely bound up with the actual state of the fundamental ontological problem. And then later on 155, he says the existential ontological foundation of language is discourse. So I'm wondering if he's suggesting that there is an internal state of being or a mood that one has that is environment based in a way, but that the only way we can really convey or have this synthesis or diaresis, this logical categorizing of our internal state of being, is analyzing dialogue, or that's where language comes into play, is that there is a internal being that we can all communicate with, that we all experience, and that communicating that is at the height of discourse, where we can only really experience others by being in a like some type of relational dynamic with, and that's where discourse or language comes into play. So that the synthesis and the logic of it is in how we use discourse to convey our moods. Like we all have our own internal state of being that we interpret, and then the discourse allows us to create logical units or understanding what is at hand, what we care for, and in a way provides us insight into that other person's state of being, but it's limited. Was that because that's what I was wanted to ask about? Is that like in line with what he's saying, or?
So my short answer would be, so he'll talk about language in a later section, although I haven't read that, so I don't really know exactly how he relates language to this stuff here.
Did I read too far?
So I think what you read was something where he talks about what he's going to talk about later in the chapter.
Oh crap. I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought
Yeah,
I
no,
was
no
catching
worries.
up and I read too far. Son of a.
I know it's what part you're talking about, where he mentions something about discourse and language, but it turns out that's going to be kind of its own section. I think we'll do that in like maybe 2 weeks from now, I think. Something like that. But yeah.
Schedule, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I'm really not sure about language. The only thing I really know is that he has kind of two different modes of it. Just like a lot of these things, where one that's more or less authentic, and another one that's more or less inauthentic. And he'll also get into eventually into exactly more so what's going on with the inauthentic thing, because for the most part, all the stuff he's talking about in this whole first division is all inauthentic. Um, but I know the language thing, he has something like that too, where there's something like a distinction between ontological speech, I guess that is kind of disclosive, I guess. That's my guess. Versus I think it's something like assertion or statements or something like that, where that sounds almost like the kind of analytic propositional way I can make a proposition that's uh indicative of some present at hand state of affairs. That's going to be this kind of ontic thing that I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but he'll say that that's different from this ontological dimension of speech. But once again, I'm kind of bullshitting off the top of my head here because I don't know. I mean, that's true of everything I say, but especially here. So yeah.
Can I say something? I'm going to respond to what James was saying earlier because I was trying to find the quote he was referencing, and then I finally found it. And about the can, should, and must. So, like at least in the Stombog, the way it's written is that a Dasein factically can, should, and must master its mood with knowledge and will may signify a priority of willing and cognition in certain possibilities of existing. And then the next sentence is, but that must not mislead us into ontologically denying mood as a primordial kind of being. And it goes on. But so the way I interpret those two sentences is that he's saying that, like, that we can, that it could be said that we can, should, and must master it, like the mood, that like that is kind of smuggling in a kind of a prioritizing of willing and cognition. Like he's almost, I think, maybe criticizing like that approach that we should, have our will and our cognition be seen as kind of supreme, like able to govern our moods. Like, and then I think he's trying to say that maybe that that because then he goes on to say like that's towards the end of that paragraph. He says, "We never master a mood by being free of a mood, but always through a counter mood." So like even when we try to, I think there he's saying even when we try to get out of a mood, we're still in one. Namely the mood of, I don't know, trying to take, will ourselves out of it or something like that. I don't. So I don't know. Maybe y'all can jump in on that.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense that what he's getting at is the whole so he refers to this he talks about how is all this stuff interpreted by the philosophical tradition, and he has this thing about Aristotle and rhetoric, and then he refers to and he's saying that it occurred through this idea affects, and then he refers to the interpretation of the affects by the Stoics, and then the church fathers, essentially. I forget what the actual word he uses for that, but I think that's kind of also what he's getting at with that interpretation of the affects by the Stoics would be something like, we have moods, but you got to control them with reason. And I mean, I don't know the specifics of. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I didn't mean to just on that. Like that, I like that. I think that's a really cool part because he seems to be saying that almost that he likes Aristotle's way of approaching it more. Like I forget the line, but he says something like, that was the last time we were really dealing with moods in the right way or something, or a way he wants to get us back at, and maybe he didn't go far enough, Aristotle or something, but then it seems like he thinks there's, at least I interpret it as like he sees Stoicism as this kind of, then we're in Stoicism, we're trying to get away from the moods, whereas with Aristotle, it's like we're trying to use the moods like, like almost like we're guiding a ship, of in rhetoric, trying to lead people the way we, and move from one move to another, rather than try to distance ourselves from moves altogether, or try to like neuter them by abstracting them, or dealing with them theoretically or something.
Yeah, yeah. So the Stoic approach would be kind of, you have the individual rational mind trying to control them, and that's why he's saying that, well, even if on this kind of, in the ordinary sense, we shouldn't just like give ourselves over to whatever kind of emotion we feel in some wild abandon, but that doesn't mean that there's some kind of rational agent that's primary before this moodedness. The moods are what's primary. Just the fact that we can have something like a rational control that at least kind of determines something about them. Just because of that doesn't mean that they're not, that the mood isn't what is primary. And I think he would assist, but I think that is kind of what the Stoics would have something like an interpretation of, well, it's really the your mind that is primary, or reason in this sense, and then that's what enables it to control these moods or emotions, which would be something more derivative. I'm not totally sure about that. I don't know Stoicism extremely well. And
Well,
it's
I think Plato and Aristotle would say that when they're even Aristotle when they're talking about ethics, because like in the Nicomachean Ethics or in stuff that Plato says, you've got that reason, and then you have the spirited feelings, and then you have the affects, and virtue is about using reason to find the middle ground in each one of these affects and spirited feelings. So it's again about reason sort of controlling these feelings. So I think virtue ethics has that same kind of sensibility to it.
yeah, that's why he points to the fact that it's the rhetoric,
Mhm.
Aristotle's rhetoric, that is interesting, which I think is also, so he refers to that the part about the rhetoric refers to the way that you the speaker who's giving the rhetoric has to understand moods, and in the dimension of publicness. So how moods are publicly determined to some extent, and how you have this sway within the public interpretation of moods. So there's kind of this understanding that isn't just simply this individual psychological uh, interior rational agent determining things in their own mind. And that's what he really likes about Aristotle, that he understands that it is a public collective thing more so. Although I will say this was one of the sections where so he's talking about, the affects and all this stuff, and that there's been no fun that's hardly been able to take one step worthy of mention since Aristotle, the fundamental ontological interpretation of affects. I think this might have been a place to possibly mention Spinoza, like one time in this entire book. If you could maybe put it one place in the whole book, maybe right here, because I would say Spinoza probably did give a step worthy of mention to the fundamental ontological interpretation of affects. I'll leave it there, but yeah.
Well, it's interesting how this kind of plays in the social composite theory, right? Because he seems to imply that there's a layer of mood that isn't that it has a social construct to it. Like you will be bored in one environment based off of who you interact with and what your particular time period is, by what that there to be bored now is wildly different from to be bored, you know 10, 20 years ago or even centuries ago. So it's interesting that he kind of uses the mood that you're like he seems to be saying that there's not a blueprint, there's not a logical construct that can automatically fit your mood into something. Like there's something to be said in how Aristotle at least recognizes that there's a social component that can kind of direct you towards this aspect of Dasein that is always kind of like present and driving us, but at the same time always hiding itself. So like the mood is kind of like a barometer in a way for attunement, like attunement. Is that why he's leading into attunement? Like if you're bored with your existence, why are you bored? And what are you doing because you're bored? And what's your environment that leads you to feel bored? And it almost puts like a certain amount of responsibility on the people that have to analyze their moods. Like, well, what, you know, why am I bored? What what about my life is making it boring? How am I expressing myself or finding who it is that I want to be or even recognizing who I am amongst everything I'm doing? And then it kind of leads to this discovery phase, I suppose. Like if I'm bored and I'm not feeling like a complete human being, maybe there is an aspect where I'm not like reaching eudaimonia, but at the same time, that's the first step towards kind of maybe constructing who I want to be or you know, who I think I am, which has a huge social component to it. That's really interesting. So it's like you can see how this, because he says on I think 132 that the facticity is not facticity here, let me pick this up. I'm sorry. 132, facticity is not the factuality of the factum brutum or something objectively present. It is a characteristic of the being of Dasein taken on in its existence, although initially thrust aside. The that of facticity is never to be found by looking. Like if I'm looking for some type of like blueprint of to what it means to be a human being, I don't think I'll ever find it.
Well, wouldn't the
However,
implication be that but maybe if you won't find it, but aren't you responsible for your own boredom? I mean, I thought that's where you were going with that, that if you're bored, don't blame the environment around you. You've got agency. Why aren't you doing something about it?
I think that's where he's leading to with attunement. The mood is kind of like a barometer that leads you to finding why it is you're bored in your environment and how you interact with others, constructing their own being.
But wouldn't it also be a sense of choice?
Yeah, I think ultimately it is a sense of choice. Like, I think that's what he's building up to is that there is a choice as to who you want to focus on and be, and the moods can help guide you into that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately there may very well be some notion of like choice. Certainly, when he's trying to talk, as we get into it, like taking up an authentic project and all this stuff, and how anxiety can be part of that. But just back on, and I'm not like but I'm just focused on what Chase had said. So I don't know if it relates or not. And what James had been asking about, like with the where are the moods? Like, is it internal or external? And I was just thinking about this because of like, Chase was talking about the publicness of rhetoric, the way Aristotle's viewing moods in that sense. And then I was remembering like that my fiance had said that her sister is a big Buffalo Bills fan, and she was at this Buffalo Bills game, last year, I guess. And it's that one where the dude, I don't know if y'all had followed this, but he like got seriously injured. He like fell or he like landed in this weird way, and he like freaking like had this crazy brain thing or heart thing or something. But anyway, the mood and she was relaying this story, to me during Thanksgiving last year, but of just how the mood shifted in the whole auditorium. It's like everyone's like, wow, it's a spectacle. We're all here for the fun of the game and all this. And then just very quickly there's that moment and it's like everything changes. And it's like everyone's on, like what the hell's going on? There's this mood that is not, yeah, in a sense it's private. Everybody's having their own mood, but it is like being facilitated or completely oriented by the moment at hand, and the world that then is given rise to by this radical shift that happens. So in that sense, I would say you don't really have a choice of the mood. It's like all of a sudden I'm in this, if you're a spectator, you're having a good time, and all of a sudden it's really weird, and there's like an ambulance that comes, the game's canceled, it's like, or whatever, it's like it totally, your mood, you can't, it's almost like a radio channel that now I'm on this, this frequency, like, so I feel like that's part of what Heidegger's getting at with the mood talk a little bit.
I think it's important to heed his warning that he's not talking about psychological states, that he's talking about something ontological. And so, when I've been reading this, I've been trying to, when I was reading the text, well, what is it that is ontological about this attunement in these modes or moods? And so here's my guess. And again, I'm not very confident about this, but that again, in order for things, ontologically speaking, in order for things to appear to me in a certain mode of being, how they can appear depends on my mode of attunement. So for example, when he's talking about fear as a mood, I cannot experience the fearfulness, the fearful being of things in the world unless I am in this mood or this attunement of fearfulness. So as a mode of being in the world, as a comportment toward the world, the fact that one of the possibilities of my comportment toward the world is in the mood of fear or the attunement of fear, that makes it possible for beings to appear as fearful in their fearful being. And so that's the way I'm thinking about, as the ontological nature of, why do these things have ontological? He says, I'm not talking about psychological states. I'm talking about these attunements, these ontological attunements. And so that's what it seems to me he's saying, is that we have these different modes of attunement, and they're primordial because those modes of attunement are what make it possible for beings to appear to us in certain ways. And so with with regard to the publicness, and with Aristotle, he says, this is in the middle of Heidegger 138, top of stem by 135, when he's talking about the rhetoric. Publicness as the kind of being of the they not only has its attunedness, it needs mood and makes it for itself. The speaker speaks to it and from out of it. He needs an understanding of the possibilities of mood in order to arouse and direct it in the right way. And so, and again, I'm not terribly confident in this interpretation, but I've never been to a Trump rally. But I'm imagining, at a Trump rally, because there he's talking about rhetoric, right? So in a Trump rally, there is a certain mood, a certain public attunement among most of the people there, and that mode of attunement makes it possible for certain kinds of things to appear that might not be available to those who are not in that mode of attunement. So you have someone like me who is there, and I just completely miss what's going on because I'm not in this particular mode of a public attunement, and so I do not get. It's like I don't have ontological access to the kinds of things that this mode of attunement makes possible for my experience. So again, I'm just trying to figure out what is this attunement and mood, because he's insistent. I'm talking about ontology, not psychology. And so the only way I've been able to figure that out is, again, that these modes of attunement, these moods, are modes of comportment toward my world that make it possible for beings to appear to me in certain ways.
Yeah,
That's my guess.
I agree with that interpretation. And maybe I can give an example. Um, well, so when I have to fight, when I have to perform, and it's like a big show, and I've done this like 25 times already, and it typically goes very similarly. The day that I have to like go and check in and do all the stuff, and like I know I'm gonna fight, like as soon as like even before, the night before when I go to sleep, it just starts to feel really heavy. Like I don't know, just everything feels so differently. Um, the, the spaces, my interactions with people, the things around me. Um, there's just like a completely different feeling that is inescapable. It just seems like everything is drenched in this, and it's kind of indescribable. It's just a very strong um, sensation that that persists until the event happens, until after the event, and then it's crazy. As soon as it's over, it's the mood completely changes. So yeah, it's like this. It is very much uh, an ontological uh, phenomenon.
So sorry to keep talking, but working off that example again, I'm not sure about any of this, but I've never been a fighter, but I'm guessing that when you're in that world, that world of the fighter, when you enter that world, that your hands and the gloves become different things than different kinds of things than they are for you when you're not fighting. And certainly, if I see a pair of gloves, even if I put on a pair of gloves, I don't know what to do with these things. I don't. It seems to me like they're just big things that would get in my way if I was in a fight. But because you can be in, I don't know what the mood would be, but because you can be in that attunement as a fighter, things in that world show up in a kind of way that is not available to probably to you, and certainly not available to me if I am not in that whatever that mode of attunement in that particular world is. So things, I'm guessing, maybe even your body has a different kind of being in a sense than your body might have when you're in the taco truck, making tacos and trying to hand them out to people. So
Yeah,
yeah.
if I can just jump on that, like I think, or as I interpret Heidegger too, it would like also things like glory and victory and these kinds of things that are like significant things for people, you know, are made possible in the context of a boxing ring, and the body in that boxing ring or whatever that are just not accessible if you haven't gone through the prerequisite training and master, whatever, all the there's so much that it's not just like, to go to what you were saying earlier, Nev, it's not just psychological, it's like ontologically I don't have access to that, at least that mode of human experience in the world, like being a the glorious victor or loser or whatever, like and that stuff is like socially mediated, like there's it's not just me, like I can't just decide for myself whether I'm the victor or not. I have to get in the ring and go toe to toe, and then I would get pummeled. It would be embarrassing for myself and anyone watching. But yeah, so I agree with that.
Yeah, the reason that I brought up the day of the fight is because my ontological axis changes on that day, um, because of the mood that it just, like I said, it just drenches everything. So my access to having those sensations and feeling that way is tied into, yeah, the participation in that particular activity, like Matthew was saying.
Yeah, so it sounds like for that example of knowing that you have to have this fight the day of or the day before, that's to do with this kind of anticipation of something, and that's what is really kind of coloring then your mood, that they're already kind of temporally colored based off of that. Is yeah, I definitely experienced similar things with actually I don't want to go into my I was thinking of one example, but it's kind of sad. So I'll just use Heidegger's example. Because I think fear is exactly what he's talking about too, is this thing of okay, fear something can only appear as fearsome for something, a being that is concerned about its own being or Dasein. So I think that's what he's getting at there, and it has to also do with this kind of um. So I read the section about the temporality of attunement earlier today, which I wish I had read when I was writing a paper on some of these topics. But anyways, at least I read it today, and it kind of goes into some of these things more. So one thing that he says that I think is relevant is that the existential ontological interpretation of moods, that it gets misinterpreted as this as a psychological phenomena, which it's kind of what he says almost throughout the whole book in a way. But yeah, so I think that is what people talk about as inner psychological moods. He's saying that's an everyday way of talking about it, but it's also a misinterpretation because it doesn't see that it's actually existential and ontological. And I think it is something like that. That Nevin was talking about with so the fact that I'm kind of already oriented, I'm open to my own being in a way where I'm already sort of thrown into the world, absorbed into it in a certain way. That's also what creates this opening, this clearing in which entities within the world can be encountered. Which so I think that language of encountering is significant. Usually doesn't get that much attention, but I think that's kind of the fact that he doesn't tend to use kind of the sort of Kantian language of, representations and appearances and whatnot, and instead talks about how things can be encountered. I think that's kind of significant to how he's trying to get outside of this psychological way of talking about things that already presupposes a sort of interiority to these things, which also presupposes a whole ontological interpretation of, the cogito, this individual enclosed thing. And then suddenly we're far away from what he's trying to get at as this kind of essential openness of Dasein to the world. So, yeah, I think another way of trying to uh, explain the ontological aspect of it is that so the attunement or mood, what that is in a existential sense is uh how I am being, the way that I am being. So it has to do with this kind of yeah, or a mode of being is exactly to be in a mood. It's to be in your own particular way of being, which also is kind of the whole thrownness thing as well. Is that's thrownness and facticity, this other word that he likes. That's kind of what that is too. It's just to be that I'm here, or I'm here, or I'm being there in a way, in a mode, in a mood. Yeah.
I'm kind of like the first thing I think of is like um like when someone says, "How are you? How are you doing today?" and I'm not doing well, I'm not going to think about my mood at that particular point, but I'm going to be aware of it. And I'm going to disclose a certain thing. Like if I'm having a really bad day and I don't know the person, I could say fine. But for a moment, I could also say I'm not having a good day. So like that mode of understanding of where I'm at that given that mood can kind of be like a barometer. Like I'm able to experience this and differentiate between those certain states of being in the environment that I'm in. And it's like an analysis of who how I'm choosing to communicate it. And I don't really think about it often. Like I'm in an emotional state sometimes when I'm having bad days, but I don't identify it as a mood until somebody asks me. And when I choose like how I choose to answer it, like you know, because I'm aware almost in kind of like an a priori sense, like I'm in a bad mood, but I'm not going to say I am in a bad mood. I'm just going to offer after like some convention of civility. But the fact that I can make that distinction and know it does say a lot about like an aspect, I suppose, of my design or being, like can lead to my attunement, maybe is what he's saying.
Can I maybe jump in on that? Because I had somewhat of a question, or kind of commenting on that, but I'm recalling a piece when he was sharing about the states of mind, and he says something around the lines of like, this is not something that we can just like reflect upon and notice. And so maybe I'm kind of responding to Joseph, your remark about like somebody asks me, and that's what kind of brings my state of mind to my awareness. But
Yeah.
I feel like there was a point where he says something along the lines of like, we almost like don't have access to our state of mind. I'm trying to find it, but he says, it made me think that like we can't just like inwardly like reflect on it, but it's kind of just like it's always hidden. It's almost like not accessible to us.
I'm trying. He did say that, so I'm trying to find that too. Like I was thinking that also, but I don't remember where it is.
Are you thinking of the where he says we're always fleeing from?
Under the 132 where he says the facticity is never to be found by looking.
I think, and I mean that sounds interesting. What you just pointed out, Joseph, but maybe I just found a note on Heidegger 136, almost 137. But I think it is. So yeah, Heidegger 136, like the second, third paragraph down. There's a paragraph that says, "From what has been said," and so I'll maybe just read that. I have a couple question marks there because it just struck me as interesting. But he says, "From what has been said, we can see already that a state of mind is very remote from anything like coming across a psychical condition by the kind of apprehending which first turns round and then back. Indeed, it is so far from this that only because the there has already been disclosed in a state of mind can imminent reflection come across experiences at all. The bare mood discloses the there more primordially, but correspondingly it closes it off more stubbornly than any not perceiving." Um, maybe, and so maybe I'm like reading into it, but I was wondering, like, in that sense, like, I think when somebody walks up to me and says, like, "How are you doing?" and I take a moment to pause and check in with my mood in this like everyday kind of colloquial way, I might be checking in with my psychical condition. And maybe I'm saying, like, do I have access to kind of just check in with my primordial attunement? And is that different than like when I stop and slow down and say, like, "Oh, today I'm feeling a little bit sad"?
So I think that what a mood or a 2 minute
Or state of mind or whatnot. So it discloses Dazein's being, but for the most part in a everyday sense, which would be that it's absorbed in the world and among these entities of its concern. But what it does not, or what it conceals is its own existential, I don't know what to call it, its own existential ontological nature. So mood doesn't disclose itself as mood. I should say attunement here. This is ontological. Okay. Attunement, state of mind, does not disclose itself as ontological attunement. Instead, it's kind of what already throws us into the world and amongst things. So that's why, even though it is a kind of mode of disclosure, it actually doesn't explicitly disclose itself as that to us in a way that is explicitly open to reflective knowledge. And instead we have to have, that's what we have to have, anxiety, angst, or profound boredom for, to cut out the particular beings, entities that we're absorbed in, and we can, when we can no longer be absorbed in those beings, then this disclosedness of Dasein will disclose itself. So, yeah, it's kind of okay. So fear is one thing. So he talks about fear as, we fear something that is fearsome, some other thing other than Dasein, but what we fear about is Dasein. But then that's not going to, that will only disclose kind of what we're actually concerned about, but it doesn't show what concern is ontologically. And that's why we are in this kind of transcendental illusion to a certain extent, or we're dispersed already in this inauthentic fallen state as absorbed in the world. But I think that the way of saying, okay, am I in a good mood or a bad mood or whatnot? I think that would still be something like so even if I reflect upon that, that would still be in this mode of a kind of uh more or less kind of like psychological, or at least probably ontic way of thinking about it, that is more reflective, but still doesn't exactly say what that is ontologically. I still think there needs to be something additional to kind of block that out. So I think that'd still just be kind of like, that's what thrownness is okay, I'm thrown in something and it shows me as being, I know that I am in a good mood or a bad mood, but I don't know why. I don't know the whence the whither. And that's I don't know the source of it. I don't know the ontology of it. So I think, I don't know, it's kind of difficult to say, but I think that's at least that's my interpretation of what's going on there, at least. I don't know if that actually really responded to it, but yeah.
I think I'm getting a lot from like the following paragraph in it as well, where he just speaks more to it and uses these words about like the mood assailing us. Right, he has the line, it comes neither from outside nor from inside, right? It's not like something that I need to pause and look inward to see what's happening inside me. And he's got these lines of like, it arises out of being in the world, because he's also saying like it's not outside, but it's just this like way of being. So I'm almost imagining that like it can be covered up when we like check in with my psychical condition, my actual state of mind or mood. might be covered over when I kind of like isolate it.
It's almost like what we kind of bring with us to our experience of being in the world. Like because he says on 133 that it's a fundamental existential mode, and I'm going to mispronounce this, I'm sorry, of the equiprimordial disclosedness of the world. Dasein with an existence because this disclosure itself is essentially being in the world. So when we disclose something, when somebody asks me what mood I'm in, like I have an environment, there's a being in the world, there's certain conditions for my experience, but what I bring with me to experience that, I think is what he's hinting at as part of the disclosure.
Yeah, and that, I mean, even prior to the person asking you what mood you're in, you're already in the mood, like, and I think he's pointing to like the fact that you're in a mood, regardless of whether you're reflecting on it or not, is, it's because you're already in the world in relation to you're in relation to the world as a whole and all of the kind of, beings that comprise it in terms vis-a-vis like how they relate to you in it and all that. All that whole experience is a mood. And then someone may then ask you, what mood are you in? And then you might reflect on it and you might be able to articulate it or maybe not, but either way, you're already in one.
Or even, I don't know, I'm guessing that he would say it's not something we bring with us, because that would imply there's like a subject who brings something along, but it just is what Dasein, it's the mode of relatedness of Dasein. It is how, it is just how it is how Dasein is comported to its environment at the moment. It's just, a way of being in the world.
Yeah, this strand of it is very like I'm sure you can test this, Nevitt, like Kierkegaard, like the way he talks about despair and everything, like that despair is a relation, the self in relation to itself. It's not necessarily like a way you feel, although you might feel bad or whatever. But Kierkegaard would say even if you think you're feeling great, you're actually in despair. Like I think he's kind of getting at a similar notion here that's like a structural part of our being, that might or might not graft on to like common usage of words like bad mood or anxiety or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually thinking that maybe that maybe this stuff really is quite inspired by Kierkegaard. And, because Kierkegaard, at least is according to a paper that, we read in the 19th century course, that Kierkegaard believes that passions have epistemological value, and that passions make it possible for you to experience certain things that if you're dispassionate, you simply can't experience certain things about the world. And it sounds like, like this is a radicalization of that. It's not just passion as a kind of epistemological stance, but it's this primordial mood that makes the world, that makes experience of a certain kind of world possible. So yeah, it seems to me that this seems to be inspired a lot by Kierkegaard.
I know the previous section about the publicness, a lot of that comes from Kierkegaard's, I don't know if it was an essay or a book or what, about the present age, I think it's called. It's the translation. I think he gets a lot of that stuff about the public from that essay, the present age of Kierkegaard. And there's the whole authenticity thing. I think a lot of that is inspired by Kierkegaard as well. There's a little bit of Nietzsche there also, but I think he's mostly getting that stuff from Kierkegaard, it seems.
Well, when you say the authenticity thing, I don't mean to interject if you had another thought, but I don't know if we've already. I feel like I don't want to relitigate something that we feel like, is already kind of obvious to us or whatever. But I guess I just I when you say that he gets the authentic thing, or at least like not that he gets it, but that we can see some sort of remnants or like a palimpsest, that sort of um that after image of some sort of echoes of Kierkegaard when he's talking about authenticity. I'm willing to believe that. I just want to know kind of because when I think of Kierkegaard and his ideas of authenticity, I don't think of anything specific except for like a sort of a sort of lack of an ability to do so without placing oneself wholly into God, into a sort of foundational um, source or force in the infinite. Um, like resting in God whole entirely. Like I feel like that's what Kierkegaard would say is like I don't know. I guess he would say I have a feeling he would say that's authentic. And so, but then Heidegger's words for authentic being oneself, and I'm not saying this is different from Kierkegaard's answer. I just don't really know what he means when he says, and this is on Heidegger 130, on the bottom of Heidegger 1, or near the bottom of Heidegger 130, on the end of the chapter 5, or chapter 4, at the end of chapter 4. So that's Macquarie and Robinson, page 168, Heidegger 130. The authentic being oneself does not rest upon an exceptional condition of the subject, a condition that has been detached from the they. It is rather an existential modification of the they as an essential existentiale. And like I'm saying, I don't mean to belabor anything if it's obvious, but I don't know what he means. Have we like is he gonna talk more about being authentic and like give me like
Yes.
a
Yeah,
use case?
he's gonna talk a lot more about it. Yeah.
Okay, good. Is there like can I get like a trailer? I don't know, like a sort of or like a
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I can give you a trailer. Yeah. Sneak peek. Yeah. Um, so okay, so the question about the relation with Kierkegaard is a little fuzzy for me, just because I don't know Kierkegaard that well. And mainly what I remember about it was from all the way back when we did wait, what was it we did the in his seminar? We did one of his books. I can't.
Fear and
Sickness
trembling
unto death, maybe?
or
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the sickness unto death, right? Did I get that right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, okay, the part that it seems to be, at least from that work, and what I very vaguely remember about it, is that Kierkegaard is saying that it's very difficult for people to actually kind of own up to themselves. They want to constantly disown themselves, and also kind of the agency that is about that. So to be a self authentically is to kind of grasp the what is possible for that self, uh, and that includes this relationship with God and all that the God stuff. So it's mainly the fact that for the most part we can't own up to the intensity of being a self that is able to grasp its own authentic, which really you could say another word for authentic would be just its own most. I can't remember the actual German, but that's the German indicates something like that. It's a kind of owned possession aspect. Um, so that's at least the Kierkegaardian kind of aspect that I've, at least for authenticity, more so. But okay, so but Heidegger, yeah, he doesn't have much, obviously much God stuff going on in this one. There's the gods that show up in the later Heidegger, which is kind of interesting. But um yeah, well we'll worry about that maybe, I don't know, in like 5 years or something when reading later Heidegger. Or I mean, you can, I guess anybody can do it on their own time. But Okay, so yeah, there's none of the God stuff, but what is authenticity for him? It's mainly about grasping your own possibilities instead of having the public they self um, interpret those possibilities for you, which is always a kind of closing off of possibilities to this is what you should do. This, and then taking that as okay, that's what I will do. So to be inauthentic, and this is where I think um it's kind of like Sartre. This is where okay, so Sartre and Heidegger really are quite different, but I think this is one place where there's some overlap where it's kind of like bad faith, where okay, the waiter that takes himself too seriously as a waiter, that's an inauthentic thing that is kind of closed himself off only according to the possibilities associated with being a waiter. But that's not all that is included in this waiter's own most possibilities. He could, for example, quit his job and not be a waiter. Uh, so that's what Heidegger's getting at. It's to be able to grasp your own most possibilities for existing. And also it's specifically related to this thing that he's going to talk about with death, with um, being towards death, where death is for him just simply the it's the possibility of no longer having possibilities, of impossibility. So it's the end of my line, but it's something that if we are temporality, then the finitude of that is going to constitute a huge part of the meaning of what it means for it to be of my possibilities. So kind of like one thing you think of it is if I learn that I'm going to die tomorrow, that changes kind of how I then interpret my own being, my possibilities. So to think in terms of I have only a finite life, I'm going to die, that is approaching at least what he's talking about with authenticity. Hopefully that wasn't too convoluted. I don't know. Was that a decent sneak peek? I don't probably not.
That made sense to me. And I'm just going over the sentence that Hunter was referencing earlier. And in my translation, I mean, it's pretty similar, but authentic being oneself is not based on exceptional state of the subject, a state detached from the they, but is an existential modification of the they as an essential existential. The last part I'm still confused on, what it means to be a modification of the they as an essential existential. But the first part, which is that authentic being is an existential modification of the they, there it seems like he's trying to say, and maybe this, you were kind of already gesturing at this, but like it seems that Heidegger's trying to distinguish from like some kind of like simple romantic notion that we can just be like totally do our own thing, that like to be authentic is to go like, reinvent the wheel or something, that we're always, because we're always already immersed in a culture, with a language and with a tradition, blah, 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 that to be authentic is somehow to take the they self and to modify it through your own Dasein or whatever, and then I think in a couple seminars back, I referenced like Dreyfus, I think was talking somewhere about, yeah, like pole vaulting. It's either pole vaulting or high jumping, but like anyway, I've said this before, but the person has to jump over the bar, and there's someone who along the way, like goes backwards up over it, and his feet lift up, and then his feet go first. And before that, everybody would just jump over head first, and him doing that gives him like these extra few inches. But like, and then it changes the game completely, and nobody ever does it that way again, the way they used to do it after him. So the point being, like, that's to be original, in a sense to be like an authentic, to the extent that that guy was, his whole Dasein's devoted to this sport and all this. But he's not changing the rules, or he has to operate within the they self, like within the tradition that's come before him. Like one who jumps has to do it according to these kind of formula, but he does it in his own with his own twist that then makes an impact. It seems that that's part of what maybe Heidegger's getting at with the way we are authentic is not to like to the way is not based on an exceptional state of the subject, a state detached from the they. We don't detach from the they. We don't. It's not that we're so exceptional, but we somehow incorporate the they self or whatever theyhood into our own Dasein in an authentic way. I don't know if that makes sense.
And when you said that moods are ontic versus attunement ontological, so like moods are kind of like an a priori way of encountering the world, and our attunement are the characteristics that we bring into experiencing the world. Is that what you mean by that?
It's the
So attunement is ontological, and then moods are ontic.
So would that make a mood kind of a priori?
well, not the particular mood. The same reason that so a bad mood.
Or being envious or being happy or whatnot. So none of those would be a priori, they would be a posteriori. But the a priori would be more the attunement. And it's an a priori that has to do with kind of determining then the mood that's ontic. So in the same way that okay, for Kant, there's the a priori space is an a priori form. And then that is what is also a condition of possibility for particular shapes, geometry to appear and make sense to us. So that would be like the mood, where attunement would be like the shape, or sorry, it would be like the form of space itself as a transcendental condition. That's like the attunement. That probably,
It kind of like discloses how we interact with the world. Is the
yes,
attunement.
yes.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. That's making a little more sense. And then okay. And I guess that's where it kind of bridges into Heidegger, because with how we interact with the world, that does lead to kind of a form of understanding, right? And that there Kierkegaard, that's like how it bridges into Kierkegaard. We have um, a a disclosure, and then because we have this a priori experience and a disclosure, then we have some type of understanding or judgment, and that attunement can kind of lead into these different judgments or experiencing the world that includes fear, that includes anxiety, what we care for, death.
Yeah, except I would probably instead of it's not so much that it's like an a priori experience, but instead it's an a priori state of existence
State of
or
existence.
existence. It is existence. So what is a priori for Heidegger would be what you are. And then the particular way that you are, the mode that you are, that would be the ontic determination of that.
Okay.
Or so the ontic has to do with particular beings. And so this is also what I think this goes into kind of the question about authenticity and his description as an existential modification of the they as an essential existential. So an existential modification that has to do with the ontic. So I think what that means is that authenticity would be something that the particular being or entity does. So it's not something that occurs on a ontological existential level. It's a particular person that does it. So if I became authentic, it's me as a being, Chase, that does it. It's not because of I've that it's occurring on a ontological level, even if it is an ontological revelation, but as a modification of an existential, that's so the being the they self, the Dasein with the being with, that's what is fundamental. That's going to occur for anything that is Dasein, it has to have that structure. So it's a modification of that on the level of particular being, or okay, you'd say like an individual, although he doesn't want to. So actually, this is one thing that is kind of interesting. He'll get into eventually. His word for individual will kind of be what he says is has to do with authenticity or an individuated, I think. So yeah, you can kind of think of it as that. The ontic existential modification is occurring on the level of what is individual about a particular being.
So
And that's also what moods are operating at as well.
so authenticity is always ontic then?
Yeah, for the most part. Even if it necessarily is revealing, though, or operating within, of course, an ontological level, as all things, of course, are.
So maybe I missed this, but did you say that authenticity is a what's the word, determination of something else, or not? Maybe you didn't say that. I was thinking like moods are a determination of attunement. Is authenticity a determination of something or
Yeah,
some existential?
I think so if I were to, it would be something more like a determination of the way that I grasp what I am ontologically,
Hmm.
but it's not going to be in the same way that attunement and mood is.
Okay.
Those are existentials. So the attunement is an existential, and then its ontic determination would be the particular mood that you're actually in, where the they self of being with Mitsein, that's going to be the existential, the ontological that all Daseins have. And then some some Daseins are able to have authenticity by modifying that, which, uh, yeah, we'll just bracket out like how exactly that's done for now. But that's at least the structure of it, to kind of, at least the way I see it.
I was gonna, Joseph was asking about like whether we experience authenticity or whatever. So I was gonna, Chase was using the similarity with space and time. So at least near as I can tell, Kant would say we don't experience space and time, but we experience things that are spatial and temporal. And so space and time are conditions for the possibility of me having a spatial and temporal experiences. And then I guess attunement would be the same kind of thing. And that attunement is what makes it possible for me to experience the world as moods, but I never experience attunement as such. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, so yeah, as a form for or a condition of possibility as a transcendental, I don't actually experience the form of time itself. Instead, the things I do experience always have a spatial and a temporal aspect to them. So, um, I think that's also what he's getting at. I think, yeah, you can make so Heidegger would be saying, yeah, attunement is an ontological structure, it's an a priori, but a mood isn't exactly, it's just simply the ontic, the particular way that that is determined, kind of like something that is determined as spatial because of the form of space that I use as a transcendental. Um, I think it's something like that. I don't know. It's kind of that one's a little different just because, Heidegger still is sort of dislocating Kant's. I think he's using the same basic kind of transcendental a priori thing going on as like conditioning, but he's putting it in a completely different place. So instead of having to do with, knowledge and conditions of possibility for how I then know that, how is that knowledge possible? Instead, he's saying that this has to do with ontology and ways of being. So the particulars in this case are then uh, how I am being, moods, ways of being, modifications. So that's, I think, at least is what's somewhat different from Kant and what makes kind of translations between them at least complicated, at least.
Is this how he's trying to kind of keep like um what's the word I'm looking for? Like it's almost like he's trying to build up a system where you can have certain entities or ontic things, but then you can also have the way they're represented so that it's different from like Dasein. Like it's like you have entities, you have characteristics, but then you also have ways that it expresses itself, and that way he can have like object permanence and epistemic certainty, but also you could have something that's distinct from being. Is that what he's trying to do, or that's what it seems like he's trying to do to me? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so one of the things that he's talking about is a lot of what people and especially those damn philosophers are talking about, they're wrong. This whole tradition has been wrong about a lot of things. And also the kind of common sense way of explicating this is also wrong. So he needs to explain why it is within his own positive theory about how it goes wrong. Um, so I think this is true of any philosophy that wants to say something similar, in that, yeah, people for the most part have gotten it wrong. Um, this is why, and I think he does want to get at that. Although I think he's mainly that will mainly be with the whole um fallen thing that he gets into. Or so the old translation, it's fallen, ver fallen. And with the new translation, it's falling prey to or entanglement. Kind of makes sense. Kind of cool. I don't know, entanglement's a cool word, but maybe a little complicated. I don't know. But yeah, that will be so if attunement and facticity are about the past, that's kind of the past determination of Dasein, then the present will be about this fallenness. And that's I think where he gets into mainly how it is that Dasein does not really understand itself, and especially in this kind of in the way that it theoretically uh thematically understands itself ontologically, it's wrong. But it has a pre-ontological understanding of itself, pre-reflective understanding of itself. That's part of its being. That's exactly what it doesn't, that's exactly what it gets wrong with the explicit theoretical way that it tries to explicate itself. Yeah. I don't hopefully that answered.
I know we're reaching probably close to the end, so I don't, but it's just something I'm thinking about. Maybe I'll bring it up next time too, but it just seems that I know Heidegger seems to be claiming that he's not trying to do ethics and it's just pure ontology and everything. But it seems that to the extent he's trying to discuss authenticity and how to become authentic and just his general discussion of like being disclosing itself in certain ways that are kind of like the way all this seems to come together, at least as I'm understanding it, is like, some people are 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 sensitive and receptive enough to have being disclosed to them, and they can kind of get away from the chatter and these sort of inauthentic forms of blah 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 and like get to this primordial thing. Some of them being me, Heidegger, being maybe a candidate for someone who's getting close to that in this project, which I'm all for. I'm not trying to disparage it, but it seems that unless I'm misunderstanding it, that there's an implicit kind of ethic. I mean, if we don't want to use that word, at least a value system that we should be striving for authenticity and whatnot. That's not necessarily. Maybe he's even accounts for that in this whole system. I'm just that's something I'm grappling with as I read it, is trying to understand like how he like I guess his normative, kind of framework of how we should be living our lives and this and that. It seems that why would he be spending all this time writing this big book that's very dense if he didn't have some kind of underlying normative, suggestion that we ought to get more in touch with authenticity or what that means and whatnot. But hopefully that makes sense as a question. I'm open to y'all's thoughts, and we can always still talk about it in the future if it's too late to get into that.
I have the same question. I don't have a clear answer. I mean, I brought, last week people were saying that at least for Dasein, so if you're going to do phenomenology, which is the way things appear, how things actually appear, that you can't really avoid these what appear to be value terms, because you're talking about phenomenology, the way things appear to Dasein, and things appear to Dasein in these what appear to be value-laden ways. So, and again, maybe this is a bad analogy, but I think again about people like Aristotle, who wants to ground his ethics in a conception of human nature. And so he lays out this explanation of human nature. And then he basically, his ethics is basically, okay, now let's be authentically human. So if you want to live consistently with what it means to be a human being, then this is how you should live. So the should, I mean, it's kind of really a kind of ought is kind of a thing, or is ought. We are this way. This is what it means to be human. And so the best way to live, happiness is essentially living consistently with human nature. I don't know. It seems like Heidegger's something like that. Like, this is what it means to be Dasein. And if you want to live in the if you want to actualize the possibilities of Dasein, which is kind of what Dasein is all about, then this is what follows. So, I mean, I don't think he would like to talk about human nature, but at least it seems like there's something something like that. The apparently normative terms come out of what it means to be authentic Dasein.
Yeah, so this is something where I don't know, I can see it from multiple viewpoints, and in a way, I think I'll try to at least for today, try to give at least what I think Heidegger would say about it. So he would probably say that I'm okay. Yeah, I'm talking the first person is that's kind of scary. I don't know. I'm not a Nazi, by the way. Um, so I'm just doing pure ontology. I'm explaining what is, and indeed, for Dasein and its own most being, to grasp it that way, that is what authentic being Dasein is. And it's only because we have this tendency, this inclination to then take that is and make that an ought. That is what makes it seem like there's ethics going on here. But really, that's just something secondary that has to do with whatever is the cause of this tendency to then to take ises and make them turn into oughts. Because just in the ontology, there's no room for some kind of a value happening on that ontological level. So there's nothing about as a equiprimordial existential along with uh something also this existential structure of goodness or badness that and even if that was the case then well authenticity itself is just a existential modification of what we actually are, which is inauthentic. So being inauthentic is what we are. Um, and also the same, but the authentic Dasein just simply grasp their possibilities in a almost fashion where mostly, for the most part, we don't. We grasp possibilities as filtered and restricted through the natural way of our being as being with others. Um, so yeah, that's my best attempt. Once again, I'm not a Nazi, so I will not use the first person as talking through Heidegger very often. So, but there's one case right there. So yeah.
No, I guess you could say I'm going to create an ethics based on I want
Yeah,
to
you
be
totally could. I think that's totally right. Yeah. You could use exactly what Heidegger is talking about and say, okay, I'm just going to simply take authenticity and then give it a value judgment and turn it into an ethics. I think he would probably agree yeah, that can be done, but that's not what I've done.
But what I was going to say is, I mean, because if he's not making value judgments, it would be, I guess, just as reasonable to say, actually, I kind of like Dasman, and I'm going to create an ethics based on just being inauthentic. And I like Dasman; it's very comfortable. I don't really have to think for myself. I don't really have to worry about being a self. I kind of go with the social flow and everything's copacetic. And so I'm going to build an ethics based on that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could. Yeah, that's where okay, then maybe the side that's more skeptical of this is still something like authenticity and whatnot is still all of the ways that he actually describes the details of it, those at that point I'd say, yeah, those are value laden terms. So even if he doesn't have it uh ontologically determined about why they are, still the way that he describes the publicness of the they self as leveling down possibilities and as a inconspicuous dictatorship. Those are value laden terms to me that indicate that it's I don't personally I don't want that. Or at least I would rather uh not have my possibilities restricted. Although it makes sense that necessarily being with others, they have to be to some degree. We have to have some collective attunement with each other, but same time to be at least skeptical of the way that restricts things. I think it seems to me like that just necessarily that's at least me as a person who cares about people as Dasein. I'm naturally my way of being is naturally led to resist a lot of the things that he's talking about as the they self. So it seems to me like it's value laden in that sense.
If someone
I feel it could be something totally different. Yeah.
if someone said to him, "Hey, I'm cool with the they self. I'm completely cool with that. And I'm going to live my life as a they self." You think that that would give him heartburn?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of the way that, a lot of the French post-Nietzscheans that are very skeptical of kind of outright morality, the capital M, the way that they'll, somebody like Baudrillard, somebody like that, the way that he'll kind of dismiss things is that he'll approach with a kind of attitude of like, that's pathetic. Like, who, no. I think you would probably think of it something like that, maybe, but then at the same time, for this particularly, maybe he would also say something like, okay, that's what you're gonna do. Yeah, that's what you are doing, and that's what you'll continue to do. So yeah, but I don't know. It seems almost strange to be able to articulate your own inauthenticity. It seems almost to imply that you have some grasp of authenticity in order to then deny it. So it seems, yeah, it's strange. Can you totally understand your authenticity even on this kind of theoretical level, and then just do that in a way where you consciously then choose inauthenticity? Would that be part of your authenticity?
You're right. It sounds
I don't
paradoxical.
know. I don't know.
That was pretty inauthentic.
Yeah.
It's almost like that character from The Matrix. What's his name? Cypher or something? Like he knows what he's doing when he chooses the inauthentic state. I mean, it's not the same. It's not the same, right? But it's very similar.
Yeah.
That steak. I know it's not a real steak, but it just tastes so good.
Put me back in the Matrix. Yep. So I have a controversial statement that's gonna make some of you angry. You know what kind of beer Dossman likes? Pabst and Lone Star.
Yeah. And you know what?
I totally disagree. I disagree with that. That's okay. The they self judges the authentic individuals who like PBR and Lone Star.
Yeah. Look, I was gonna say whether or not the they happen to enjoy my favorite beers or not. That's if they do, great. If not, they're lost. But I'm busy over here using it as an existential modification of that they as an essential existentiale every time that I open Pabst Blue Ribbon. Okay, so I don't know what you're doing when you're drinking your beers, but that's what I'm doing. All right.
Wow. Wait, did you already know that he had one right there?
I didn't.
Okay, so yeah, that's
I think it's
It's
just
a
kind of
safe-
implied that he'll have
I
one
mean,
right there, along with other
it's-
things.
it's
Since
the
we're being
they, so
recorded.
I mean, like, there was a high probability there, so.
All right, I'm going to bed. This has been fun. Appreciate y'all.
Going to
Yeah.
bed. It's like
Well,
But I
9
would
o'clock.
say,
I know I'm old. I have to get up at like 5:30 in the morning. I got to do
Oh
something. Like, I know it
God.
sucks.
That's
Good night,
the
man.
day self. That's the worst part of the day self. I'm sorry. That sucks. Okay.
Well, if I don't, then I'm
What are you saying, Ed?
if I can make an observation about the beer thing, from what I can tell about Hunter, it's not an affectation for him to drink PBR. He really stupidly enjoys it, and it's a real
Wow.
authentic part of who he is.
Wow, Ed.
And I really do
Wow.
think it's an authentic part. He's not
Yes.
playing, he's not pretending like, oh, I'm slumming. I'm going to have a PBR so I can be with the whole hoi polloi. This is really him.